Have you ever looked at one of these most wanted posters and thought to yourself, how does someone actually end up on one of these? What kind of life, or choices, puts you in that top tier of fugitives? Well, I have. In fact, I recently made a video covering Japan's 4 most wanted suspects. That seemed to go down a treat, so I figured I'd turn this into a series. And for this second installment, we're heading across the sea to put Japan's uneasy neighbour under the microscope. Unlike many other countries, South Korea maintains an ever-changing list of high-profile fugitives known as the publicly wanted criminals. Twice a year, in May and November, 20 suspects are selected by a committee for nationwide manhunts and public exposure campaigns. They're typically ranked based on 3 factors: the severity of their crime, how long they've been on the run, and the urgency of their apprehension. In total, about 20,000 sheetlets like this are distributed around subway stations, hotels, bathhouses, rest stops, and funnily enough, plastic surgery clinics, places where those featured are likely to visit. According to reports, when a suspect's face is added to one of these public wanted notices, there's a 45% chance of them being apprehended within 12 months. These are the stories of 4 men who have repeatedly featured on the list, and who have still managed to evade capture for far longer than that. Fugitive number 1. Joo-yeon. Bounty: 3 million won. South Korea has one of the most comprehensive and centralized ID systems in the world. At age 17, each citizen must register for a national identity card, which includes their resident registration number, and which is linked to a government database containing biometrics, like fingerprints. This ID is essential for a plethora of activities: opening a bank account, seeing a doctor, applying for jobs, even accessing some websites. Unlike many countries, it's nearly impossible to go a week in South Korea without having to prove you are who you say you are. On top of that, the country's blanketed with CCTV cameras. Surveillance is so widespread that tracking someone's movements can be as easy as following a digital breadcrumb trail. So how is it possible that some of the country's most wanted suspects can simply vanish? That's the question surrounding one man who's been on the run for over 17 years. On June 17, 2008, a horrifying attack occurred in Gangnam, one of Seoul's busiest and supposedly safest districts. At approximately 8:30 p.m, right when people were finishing work and heading home, commuters heard a scream cut through the air. They tracked it to a narrow alleyway just behind the bustling express terminal, now known as Central City, and found 32-year-old Miss K and her 33-year-old boyfriend, Mr. B, crumpled on the ground. A man had stabbed the couple over a dozen times each before bolting across an 8-lane road, barely making it to the other side without being hit by traffic. Bystanders had been unable to get a good look at him. Both victims were rushed to hospital immediately, though it was clear they were in a bad state. By the time investigators arrived, Miss K was completely unconscious. However, her partner, Mr. B, was just about lucid. Fearing that he too may soon pass out, the officers begged him to muster up his energy and reveal the identity of the culprit who had stabbed them. Mr. B groaned in agony, but was able to get out a few words. It was K's ex-husband, Joo-yeon. Miss K would sadly pass away shortly after the attack, though her partner, Mr. B, would miraculously make a full physical recovery. Had he not, had the killer's blade hit his heart instead of missing it by centimeters, then it would have taken detectives a lot longer to begin hunting the perpetrator. Born in 1975, Joo-yeon had spent most of his life in his hometown of Gyeonggi-myeon working various jobs, such as an agricultural machinery broker, a taxi driver, and a multi-level marketing executive for a pyramid scheme. Blessed with the gift of the gab, Hwang knew how to suck people in, gain their trust, and keep them loyal, even while he was scamming them. But he was also hot-tempered, reckless, the type to go off the rails without thinking. All traits that would be his downfall down the line. Hwang met the future mother of his child, Kay, at some point in the mid-90s. She was initially attracted to Hwang, not just because of his confidence, but also his physique. Hwang stood at around 5'11", tall by Korean standards, and was heavily built, with a background in Muay Thai. And yet despite his impressive size, under the surface, Hwang was nothing more than a possessive man-baby. Hwang and Kay married in 1997, though their relationship was turbulent and reportedly abusive from the start. They separated after just 3 years, but reunited briefly for the sake of their daughter. Again, it didn't last. After round 2 of a toxic, unstable marriage, they finally divorced in 2003, with Hwang declaring, "I want to marry someone else." You see, throughout his marriage to Kay, Hwang had secretly been involved with another woman, P. They dated for 4 years, but P eventually discovered that he had lied about being single and having no children. She of course left him, but after the breakup, Hwang became obsessive. He stalked P, hacked into her computer, and threatened her new fiancé. After his new relationship failed, Hwang turned his attention back to Kay, calling her in 2008 and begging for another chance, claiming that he had changed. Kay, now in a new relationship and building a new life, refused to engage with him. But that simply wouldn't do. Hwang always got his own way. Choosing to ignore him wasn't an option. And so, a few days before the attack, Hwang called the police and falsely stated, "My wife left home saying she was going to end herself. She won't answer the phone. I demand that you trace her whereabouts and give me her location." When that failed, he hired a private investigator to find her. And when that too didn't work, he decided to use their daughter as bait. After their divorce, the pair had agreed to share custody of their now elementary school-aged child. And so, Hwang sent Kay an email claiming that he had lost his job, was deep in debt, and needed her to temporarily take their daughter. He followed up with a 13-minute call to Kay, in which they discussed where to meet. But this wasn't set to be a peaceful reunion. At just after 8 PM on June 17th, Hwang arrived at the Seoul Express bus terminal, parked his blue Hyundai New Porter in the underground lot, and left his daughter in the passenger seat. He then put on a wig and sat and waited for Kay to arrive at their designated meeting spot. But things didn't go according to his plan. Down the alleyway, Hwang saw his ex-wife, but she wasn't alone like he expected. She had brought company, her new boyfriend, Mr. B. The new couple stood face to face, talking about him no doubt, how aggressive he could be, how they'd need to be on their guard, and he was about to prove them right. Disguised in his wig, Hwang rushed towards them. Using a butterfly knife which he kept concealed in his pocket, he charged at Mr. B and stabbed him 14 times in the stomach and chest. When B collapsed, Hwang wrapped his arms around Kay's neck and began dragging her, stabbing her about 18 times in the chest and abdomen before fleeing the scene. Police later found his vehicle, which contained both his daughter and a disturbing array of items: hammers, knives, and a shovel. It was clear he had other plans for the evening, but the authorities believe seeing Kay with another man triggered a sudden, uncontrollable rage within him. After the attack, Hwang vanished. Surveillance footage captured the following day showed him behaving erratically in multiple subway stations, travelling up and down lines, stopping at distant locations, staying 40 to 50 minutes at each. This was likely an attempt to throw off the police. Eventually, he called his brother-in-law, Miss Kay's own sibling, and stated, "Please take care of my daughter. I'm going to disappear." He also reportedly called up a close friend and declared in a more jovial manner, "I don't even understand how so many criminals get caught. I'm confident I won't be." And so far, he's been right. He was last caught on camera exiting Pyongyang station, and he hasn't been seen since. Detectives checked his so-called life actions, his phone activity, bank records, credit and transportation card usage, but his digital footprint had gone dark. That is, apart from one breadcrumb, which flagged up 3 weeks after the manhunt began. On July 10th, an individual entered an internet cafe close to the original crime scene. This person, a male who went by the name Lee Bom-jun, registered an account using their national ID card. Once inside, he logged into Hwang's personal email address. Though the store didn't have any internal CCTV cameras, this Lee Bom-jun was most certainly Hwang Joo-yeon. While online, he sent out messages to his nearest and dearest, stating that he would never be found and that he knew the authorities would now be monitoring his emails. The police searched the number on the ID card that Hwang had used to register at the cafe and traced it back to a local female entertainment worker, a term that's often used to describe women who work at more illicit nightlife businesses. It's possible that while on the run, Hwang had formed a romantic relationship with an employee at some dodgy establishment and either manipulated or convinced her to assist him. They also learned that after checking his emails, Hwang accessed a recruitment website and browsed agricultural job listings, suggesting he was looking for work in rural areas where people might not recognize him or know about the case. The authorities interviewed his friends and relatives, who all remained tight-lipped and uncooperative. Aware that he had extremely poor eyesight and needed prescription glasses, they also distributed Hwang's wanted flyers to opticians around the country, though they didn't hear back from any clinics. Over the years, several people reported that they had seen the fugitive working as a taxi driver or as a construction worker. Most of these tips were followed up on, but in each instance, the individual in question was proven not to be Hwang. For 17 years, he's managed to avoid detection in one of the most heavily surveilled countries in the world. How? Well, there are 4 main hypotheses. I'll go over them now, from least to most likely. Theory 1. Something Hwang, an avid outdoorsman, maybe in the mountains, surviving alone. But experts are skeptical. Despite treating those around him like disposable assets, Hwang was extroverted, social, and had many friends. Criminal profilers believe it's unlikely someone like that could isolate completely for so long. Even the most determined of fugitives tend to revert back to their old ways after a long enough period on the run. Though there's a slim chance they're wrong, the authorities don't consider this a real possibility. Theory 2. Some speculate that Hwang was smuggled out by sea to another Asian country, most likely China. Such a method of escape is popular among fugitives, as the local Coast Guard are famous for not checking ships thoroughly, and the South Korean authorities have been known to accept bribes and look the other way in past cases. However, this method is also risky, expensive, and requires a trustworthy broker. Such escapes can cost upwards of $40,000 US. Hwang didn't have that kind of money, and investigators found no evidence that he had contacted any smugglers. However, escaping overseas would explain why no trace of him has shown up anywhere in Korea, so we can't rule this theory out completely. Theory 3. It's possible Hwang is no longer alive, perhaps having ended his own existence. His own mother told reporters that she believes he's passed. She even said that psychics had told her he fell into a body of water and drowned. Ultimately, even though no corpse has been found, there is a good chance that he really did drown himself in the ocean. And Theory 4. Hwang is receiving help from someone. Inspector Chon Yeon-ji compared the case to that of notorious prison escapee Shin Chang-won, who evaded capture for years with the help of others. As previously mentioned, Hwang had used the ID of a woman in the entertainment industry to register an account at the internet cafe, proving he already had access to someone else's identity. Whether it had been stolen or given to him willingly remains unclear, because apparently the police were unable to get in contact with the woman it belonged to, something which seems odd, given they must have been able to find her name and address using the ID number. There's also a good chance that Hwang is receiving help from family and friends. He may well have been able to charm, or given his size, perhaps even intimidate those around him to keep their mouths shut. For instance, when a film crew went to interview those who knew him, they were repeatedly brushed off, with one of Hwang's friends even saying, "He was like family to me. The incident's over, and I have no intention of cooperating with you. If you come over again, I might beat you up." Whatever the case, if Hwang has continued to change his ID, avoid digital traces, and stay off the radar, he could still be laying low somewhere in the country. Though given just how infamous his face has now become over the years, he likely would have needed to alter his appearance significantly. In Korea at least, that's not a huge problem. The country's the world leader in plastic surgery, with 1 in 5 South Koreans having had some form of cosmetic procedure done. But though these wanted posters are often distributed as surgeries throughout the nation, the surgeons themselves aren't legally obligated to report on any of their clients. And for the right price, they may choose to keep their lips sealed. As for how Hwang's been sustaining himself, he's either being provided for by people loyal to him, is stealing, scamming, or otherwise swindling people, or he's found work using his fake ID. Indeed, experts believe that he's hiding in plain sight, possibly living under an assumed identity as a foreign worker, perhaps Chinese Korean or Mongolian, likely in a place with a diverse population. But what do you think? Could someone really live without leaving any trace for 17 years in a country like South Korea? Could Hwang still be out there, blending in amongst the population? Authorities believe so, and continue to feature his face on these most wanted posters, usually somewhere in the top 5 slots. If still alive today, Hwang Joo-yeon would be 50 years old. More than likely, he's lost a lot of muscle mass with age, changed his hairstyle, and altered his facial structure. But there are some things that probably haven't changed. Not only his height, but also his distinctive twisted jaw, the cauliflower ears he had developed from years of practicing combat sports, the unconscious manner in which the corner of his lips raise when he smiles, and crucially, his extremely poor eyesight, which has likely gotten worse with age. With so many identifiable characteristics, if he is still out there, someone must know who he is. A reward of 3 million won, or $2,100, is still being offered to anyone willing to break their silence. That amount might sound low compared to the sums on offer in other countries. Indeed, the bounties on the Japanese fugitives I covered were far higher, but the fact that an amount has been announced is significant. In South Korea, the reward on offer for each wanted person is almost always kept secret, and typically ranges from 1 to 3 million won. There have, however, been larger sums placed on the heads of public enemies, usually on those who have made South Korean officials look bad. Perhaps the most notorious figure to ever appear on this list was Yoo-yeon, a billionaire tycoon, de facto cult leader, and the head of the family that owned Chongha Jin Marine, the company that operated the ill-fated MV Sewol ferry. In April 2014, the Sewol capsized off the coast of Jindo, killing 304 people, most of them high school students on a field trip. There were multiple people to blame, of course, not least the Coast Guard, who sat on their hands and botched the rescue effort, the captain who told his passengers to remain in their cabins, only to immediately abandon ship himself, and the education system for teaching youngsters to be passive and obedient to authority. But when officials began investigating the incident, it came to light that Yoo had a long history of financial crimes, and was directly implicated in the negligence and corruption that led to the sinking. But Yoo had no intention of standing trial. In his mind, he was innocent, for as he preached to the members of his cult, the Salvation Sect, once someone is saved, they can never sin again, no matter what they do. So by the time the full extent of his involvement was uncovered, Yoo had already gone into hiding. A nationwide manhunt followed, and Yoo became the subject of the highest bounty in South Korean history, 500 million won, roughly $490,000. After months of searching, the businessman's badly decomposed remains were found in a rural plum orchard in Suncheon. A lack of clarity surrounding his COD fed conspiracy theories, with many believing that he paid off Korean authorities and escaped overseas. Indeed, the person who made the discovery didn't even know the body was Yoo-yeon, and simply reported that he had found a deceased homeless person in a field. Since he didn't specifically state that he had found Yoo-yeon, the bounty wasn't paid. Hopefully the amount placed on Hwang Joo-yeon will be. Fugitive number 2. Park Jong-yoon. Bounty 10 million won. Born in 1960, Park Jong-yoon isn't famous in the traditional sense, but in law enforcement circles, he's notorious. For almost 2 decades, this otherwise ordinary, indistinct face has consistently appeared on the National Police Agency's posters. But Park isn't just any old villain. He's South Korea's most wanted fugitive, the main suspect in a brutal double homicide committed back in 2007. And ever since that winter, he's been a ghost. perhaps in the figurative sense, perhaps in the literal. On the morning of September 29th, 2009, in a remote area near Yonggwol, Gangwon province, a man scavenging for chestnuts and mushrooms stumbled upon something terrible. The lid of a rubber container, scraps of fabric, and human bones. Police arrived and soon uncovered 2 shallow graves. Inside were the remains of 2 male murder victims, decomposed and stripped of identity. The bodies appeared to have been there for at least a year, possibly 2. One shirt had sleeves tied with plastic packaging string, indicating that he had been restrained. DNA testing took time, but clues came quickly. The clothing matched with 2 men who had disappeared from Seoul back in 2007, a 47-year-old loan shark, Kong-ji Kim, and his 52-year-old bodyguard, Pang-so-jabi Oh. Known as the lender and the organizer respectively, the pair had become high-profile figures in underground gambling circles, and the word on the street was that they had been abducted. South Korean police are often accused of incompetence, and they were again in this instance, as had they done their job correctly, those rumours could have been confirmed at the time. Back in 2007, they'd found Mr. Oh's jacket and Mr. Kim's wallet at the exact location where their remains were later discovered, but failed to unearth either body. As such, they couldn't issue arrest warrants for the 2 prime suspects, taxi driver Park Jong-yoon, 49, and office worker Nam Gong-shin, 34. Phone records confirmed that they had been the last people to talk with the victims, and both men certainly had a motive. Park was a habitual gambler, with debts approaching $500 million won, around $350,000 US at the time, money which he owed to some sinister crime lords. As for Nam, he too had fallen deep into gambling addiction, and owed similar individuals about 20 million won, around $14,000. Now armed with hard evidence in the form of 2 skeletons, police finally got the green light. Arrest warrants were issued, and after a 2-month surveillance operation, Nam was arrested. He appeared cheerful as officers approached him, humming to himself as he made his way to work, but his mood soon shifted when the cuffs came out. On the way to the station, his hands began to tremble, and eventually he broke down, sobbing. As for Park, he was nowhere to be found. Nam said little until his lawyer showed up. After that, he stopped talking altogether. But when it became clear that the evidence against him was compelling enough to secure a conviction, he cooperated in exchange for a lesser sentence. According to Nam, he and Park first met in an underground gambling den several years before the incident. It's worth noting that bar a few tightly controlled exceptions, gambling is outlawed in South Korea, but that doesn't mean it's not popular. The NGCC estimates that 5.5% of South Koreans can be classified as gambling addicts. Nam Gong-shin and Park Jong-yoon were but 2 of 2.4 million residents hooked on dice and cards. They also had similar play strategies. You know how you sometimes find people who match your betting style in those places? Nam later recalled to investigators. Well, that was us. Despite a 15-year age gap, the pair quickly bonded over their poor relationship with Lady Luck. Together, they travelled to places like Gangwon-land, the only casino where South Koreans can legally bet, emptying their wallets and dreaming of that one big win that they both sorely needed. And after a chance encounter in April 2007, they thought that they had hit the jackpot. During a particularly shady game, Park met and acquainted himself with an off-duty bodyguard, Mr. O. Whispers in Seoul's nightlife scene claimed that his boss, Mr. Kim, carried stacks of cash in the trunk of his Mercedes, perhaps as much as 200 million won. Park and Nam had heard those same rumours, and if there's one thing you can take away from this video, it's that money, or the lack of it, can make people do unforgivable things. On December 11th, 2007, Park called Mr. O and invited him over to the semi-basement room that they often used as a gambling den. There, Park told Mr. O about his plan to steal the fortune hidden in Mr. Kim's vehicle. All Mr. O had to do was look the other way, and they could split that money 50-50. But O was a loyal employee. He and Kim had a good thing going on, and he had no plans of double-crossing his boss. But now the cat was out of the bag, Park couldn't just let O walk away. Later that gloomy evening, Park made a second phone call, this time to Nam.
"Come over immediately,"
he told him.
"We're about to strike it big."
When Nam arrived, he immediately noticed Mr. O spread out on the floor, his brains bashed in. Park explained that he had no choice but to kill the bodyguard, since he refused to play along with his get-rich-quick scheme. Park then proposed that Nam help him steal Kim's money instead. Given the situation, Nam felt like he was in no position to argue. Together, the duo purchased string and duct tape at a nearby supermarket and lured Kim to the den under the pretense of a high-stakes gambling game. Once he arrived, Kim was confronted with the sight of his loyal henchman, O, spread out on the ground. His heart no doubt sank as Nam locked the door. Without a word, Park then struck Kim with his fist, knocking him to the floor. The duo took a paltry 300,000 won in cash from Kim's wallet, around $250, as well as his wristwatch and a credit card. Park demanded to know the PIN number, and after Kim told him, Park kneed him in the head several times, knocking him unconscious. The two thieves tied him up and then eagerly skipped out to Kim's Mercedes to claim their fortune. A three-pointed star marked the spot. They popped the trunk and, with excited giggles, opened it up to find that the rumoured cash inside didn't exist. Dumbfounded, Park and Nam then went to a nearby cash point, only to find that Kim's bank account was near empty. What they didn't realise was that despite his outward displays of wealth, Kim wasn't actually rich. There was someone behind him funding his operation. Someone who understood the risks of dealing with desperate addicts. Someone smart enough to operate from the shadows. Frustrated, Park and Nam filled the empty truck with Kim, whom they had bound with string, gagged with tape, and wrapped in a blanket. Kim would later die from asphyxiation inside the trunk. At 1:30 AM on the 12th, Park and Nam rented a Hyundai Starex and drove around, searching for a suitable burial spot. Their first attempt was near Namyangju, but they couldn't find a decent location, so they stored the bodies inside the van for 2 days while they scouted for the perfect spot. They placed Mr. O inside a large rubber container and left Kim bound up in the blanket. At around 7 PM on the 14th, the duo stopped their car on the shoulder of National Road number 38 in Yongwoo, pulled the bodies out, and rolled them down a hill towards a forest. Nam would later reenact this with investigators using life-size dolls. After tossing out both bodies, Nam dug a grave while Park stood watch. However, given that it was a crisp -7 degrees Celsius that night, the earth was frozen solid and extremely hard to dig. Park wasn't satisfied with Nam's shoveling speed, and thus he took over and told Nam to go and keep an eye out. Call records show 3 phone conversations between them during that time, proof that they were both at the scene and cooperating. A week later, on December 18th, further phone records showed that the two killers returned to the burial site together. Their devices pinged off a nearby cell tower. Oddly, it was during that rendezvous that Park's phone pinged for the very last time. Shortly after arriving, his signal vanished forever. In fact, every trace of him vanished. No calls, no bank activity, no medical records. Everything from that moment forward went dark. Even more unsettling is that something else disappeared along with Park. The rubber container that had been used to transport O's body. When police later revisited the burial site, the lid was still there, but the tub itself was gone. It's hard to imagine how someone could erase themselves so completely, especially in a country like South Korea. Over the years, certain rumours have swirled that Park escaped to the Philippines, or found work on a deep-sea fishing vessel, or hid amongst some fringe religious group. One internet livestream even featured a taxi driver who looked eerily like him. Indeed, it is possible that Park had planned his escape from the beginning. He may have used burner phones, switched to a cash-based lifestyle, made a full identity change. But while something that Park vanished on his own terms, others have a darker theory. That Park Jong-yoon ended up in that same rubber container as Mr. O. that his own accomplice, Nam, killed him. Some investigators speculate that tensions may have built up between the pair of desperados. Park, who was the elder of the two, was likely the dominant force in the partnership and probably ordered his submissive partner around. After committing murder and failing to gain financially from it, Nam's resentment, or perhaps fear, may have reached a breaking point. Nam, of course, denied silencing Park, insisting that he met with him several times after his supposed disappearance. However, his responses grew vague under questioning. Nam no doubt played down his own involvement in the caper, painting the now absent Park as the mastermind, and himself as an unwilling accomplice. But what if Nam was actually the main culprit? The ringleader who ordered Park around to do his bidding? The one who invited Mr. O and Mr. Kim over to the den that night in order to slaughter them? The one who found a perfect scapegoat? Could it be that he's a man so devoid of feeling that he ended the life of his partner and closest friend just to cover his own tracks, and then, after being caught, was more than happy to pin the blame squarely on his own victim? Without Park to share his side of the story, prosecutors had little else but Nam's version of events to go on, and so he was only charged with the robbery and manslaughter of Mr. Kim, and not Mr. O. Nam was sentenced to a mere 15 years in prison by the Seoul Eastern District Court. He was released on November 28, 2024, and many people can't help but wonder whether a psycho who butchered 3 people is currently roaming the streets of Seoul. As of 2025, 17 and a half years later, the whereabouts and well-being of Park Jong-yoon, South Korea's #1 most wanted fugitive, remains unknown. He's 5'8", walks with a bow-legged gait, speaks with a Jeolla accent, and is described as having the physique of a cuttlefish, whatever that means. If still alive, he'd be 64 years old today. Someone out there, maybe Nam, maybe someone close, knows where he is. A reward of 10 million won, around $7,000, is being offered to anyone with information that results in his finding, whether he's alive or dead. Though if I were a betting man, I know which outcome I'd put my money on. Fugitive number 3. Choi Young-bae. Bounty? Unknown. This next cold case unfolded in Seosan, a quiet, unassuming village tucked away in Yeongdang County. Back in 2004, one resident, a 48-year-old woman known only as Miss Park, had earned a reputation among the locals, but not for reasons anyone would envy. She was notorious for borrowing money from other villagers and blowing it all on luxury items. Her debts, however, were rarely repaid on time, if at all, which led to rising resentment from neighbours. Many in the village spoke openly about having lent her money, only to be left waiting. But of all of her creditors, none had more cause for concern than 45-year-old Choi Young-bae, a local family man known for his steady work ethic and willingness to lend a hand. Choi had not only loaned Miss Park a significant sum, but he had also co-signed a bank loan in her name. In Korea, co-signing isn't taken lightly. If the borrower defaults, the co-signer assumes full responsibility for the debt, and by mid-2004, the banks were closing in, demanding that Mr. Choi settle the balance himself. For a man with a spotless reputation and a family to support, it was a crushing burden. By all accounts, Choi was the kind of person others relied on, a quiet pillar of the community. He never hesitated to help other villagers out with their problems, big or small, but in this instance, his generosity had gone too far. Those close to Miss Park had repeatedly warned her, "You really need to pay Choi back before June 21st. Park would smile and nod along, but their words went in one diamond-studded ear and out the other. It was obvious she had no intention of coughing up any cash. Choi, growing increasingly desperate, would often show up at her home unannounced, but Miss Park always found ways to avoid him. She'd change her phone number, or slip home late at night when the rest of the village was asleep. Choi's mounting frustration didn't go unnoticed by the other locals. June 21st came and went, and residents half expected an explosive confrontation. but instead, nothing. Neither Miss Park nor Mr. Choi were seen or heard from. Days passed in uneasy silence. Then, on June 24th, a chilling confession. One of Choi's friends testified that while drinking together that night, Choi pulled out a knife and said, "By the way, I killed Miss Park. I'll end myself too." His friend, stunned, managed to calm him down and brushed off his outburst as drunken bluster. Just the bitter words of a man pushed to his limits. At around 10 AM on June 25th though, a neighbour stopped by Miss Park's home and walked into a grim scene. There, lying motionless on the floor, was Park. A forensic examination would later confirm what the scene already suggested. She had been ambushed and struck twice in the head with a blunt object, most likely a hammer. The first blow had incapacitated her. The second was delivered to make sure she wouldn't survive. This wasn't an act of sudden rage. This was premeditated. When investigators arrived in Seosan, Choi's demeanour shifted noticeably. Witnesses said that the typically upbeat salaryman now appeared anxious, visibly shaken even. Some speculated he was simply reeling from the reality that he'd never recover his money from Miss Park. But given the confession he had already made to his friend the night prior, others believed that he was dogged by guilt. Either way, the police were eager to question him. There was just one problem. He had fled town before they could. An arrest warrant was swiftly issued, and Choi became a nationally wanted fugitive. Before going on the run, Choi withdrew money from the bank without telling his family. He also reportedly got into a serious car accident, refused medical treatment, and called a friend from a nearby phone booth, saying, "Dying is a lot harder than I thought." Police theorize that between the night of June 21st and the early morning of June 22nd, Choi hid behind the wall next to Miss Park's front gate and waited for her to return home. When she did, he followed her inside, cornered her in the living room, struck, and then struck again. For 2 days, he ruminated on what he had done, before meeting with his friend for drinks and making his confession. Since vanishing, Choi's been a mainstay on South Korea's national wanted posters, with this photo of him typically featuring somewhere in the top 6 slots. However, it's been 21 years, and the public is urged to consider what he might now look like. Choi has distinguishing traits. He's about 5'9", wears glasses, and speaks with a Changchung province accent. Several theories about his whereabouts exist. Some grounded, such as him fleeing the country, or living in a remote community under a new identity, and some outlandish, such as him joining a secretive cult, or living for 2 decades as a homeless drifter. Considering his friend's testimony about the situation on June 24th, and the circumstances surrounding the traffic accident, it seems that he suffered from mental distress, to the point where it wouldn't have been strange for him to end his own existence soon after disappearing. And yet, police remain convinced that he's still alive, and that even now, after so many years, someone knows where he is. While researching this case, I couldn't help but be reminded of the Airi Sato incident I covered in my last video. Like that case, it raises uncomfortable questions about justice, desperation, and the breaking point of ordinary people. It's easy to sympathize with Choi, a decent man whose kindness was taken advantage of. A man pushed to the edge by someone who, by all accounts, never intended to pay him back. In a better world, there'd be fewer Miss Parks exploiting the generosity of others. But no matter how much sympathy one may feel, it's important to remember that Choi was an adult of sound mind who made the conscious decision to co-sign a neighbour's loan. A decision he later came to regret, but one that didn't justify taking a life. No matter what the provocation, no one has the right to act as judge, jury, and executioner. And so, despite the sympathy that still lingers in public memory and on internet discussion boards, Choi Young-bae remains a wanted man, and his face continues to appear on police posters across the country. A reward is being offered for information leading to his capture, though the exact amount hasn't been publicly announced. Fugitive number 4, Song Ji-young. Bounty 1,000,000 won. A man walks into his office and finds blood smeared across the floor, but no sign of his brother anywhere. Days later, that same brother is found stabbed to death and dumped in a septic tank. The main suspect? A quiet truck driver who vanished without a trace and who hasn't been seen in 16 years. It was April 21st, 2009, in the picturesque and laid-back city of Jong-yoon. That morning, 49-year-old Mr. Lee arrived at his moving company office to start his day, expecting to be greeted by his younger brother, 37-year-old Kwang-hoon. Mr. Lee was the CEO and allowed his brother to sleep at the office. The moment he opened the door, though, something felt off. Papers were scattered all over the floor. The refrigerator was left open. The room was chaotic, disturbed. But before he could process the situation, his phone rang. It was his sister-in-law, Jesu. She said Kwang-hoon hadn't come home the night before, and he wasn't answering his phone. Lee met with her immediately, and together they went to the police to file a missing person report. Then they searched the city. Some might say that they reacted fast, maybe too fast in the eyes of the police, but they had good reason to. Kwang-hoon was always reachable. He kept his phone on, because, for reasons we'll soon cover, he always carried large sums of cash. Later that same day, Mr. Lee returned to his office. This time, with his brother's disappearance weighing heavily on him, he took a closer look around. That's when he noticed something that he had missed earlier. Red smears and droplets. On the floor, on the doorknob, on a chair, the bathroom light switch, even the sink. Small, dark stains in 7 different spots. They weren't immediately obvious, but once seen, were impossible to ignore. Mr. Lee called the police immediately. Forensics arrived, and the blood was tested. When the results came back, it was confirmed to belong to Kwang-hoon. The missing person case was now a potential homicide. A few days later, Kwang-hoon's white SM3 sedan was found parked in the lot of Jeongeop Asan Hospital. But something was wrong. The license plates had been swapped out, clearly a deliberate act to obscure the vehicle's identity and mislead anyone looking for it. A forensic sweep of the car turned up fingerprints on the driver's side handle and steering wheel. They matched with Song Ji-young, a 38-year-old truck driver employed at the same moving company. It didn't take long for police to zero in on Chong as their prime suspect. His alibi was shaky at best. April 20th, the day Kwang-hoon disappeared, was Song's wife's birthday. She had been expecting him home for dinner, but he never arrived. When he still wasn't back at 8 PM, she went to his workplace, only to find it dark and empty. Then, at 9:30 PM, Song finally walked through the door. But something was clearly wrong. His clothes were soaked, his body covered in mud, and he had fresh injuries on his hands. When questioned, he claimed that he had fallen. That might have passed as a clumsy excuse, but what happened next raised even more suspicion. At 2:30 AM, Song left the house again. When the police later asked where he went, he said that he had simply gone out for a beer. But his wife told a different story. She remembered him leaving in a white sedan, one she didn't recognize. A white sedan, just like Kwang-hoon's. Song returned about an hour later. Investigators soon uncovered a deep connection between Song and Kwang-hoon, one that made his motive painfully clear. Kwang-hoon wasn't just an employee at the moving company. He was what's known in gambling circles as a kongchakun. He lent money to wannabe high rollers, often fellow truck drivers at the company, and collected interest, usually during illegal games held at the workplace. Song, it turned out, had been a frequent participant. On April 19th, the day before the disappearance, a gambling session had taken place at the office. Song had lost everything and borrowed 500,000 won from Kwang-hoon to continue playing. The next day, he was due in court for a bankruptcy hearing. That April 21st court appearance ended with Song officially declared bankrupt. Under Korean law, personal bankruptcy can lead to as much as 90% of one's debts being forgiven, something meant to help give people a second chance. It's believed Kwang-eun may have confronted Song after learning about his bankruptcy. The amateur loan shark likely wanted his money back. Some speculate that an argument erupted into violence, and that's when Kwang-eun was killed. But there was still no body to confirm that. Investigators suspected that Song's late-night outing was a hastily planned attempt to dispose of it. He was gone for just an hour, hardly enough time to travel far. That suggested that the body may be somewhere nearby. Yet despite thorough searches, they found nothing. Without a body, and with only circumstantial evidence at best, police couldn't formally charge Song with anything. The fingerprints in Kwang-eun's car could be explained. Song did work with him after all. There was simply no smoking gun. And so, to find one, they called Song back in for questioning. This time, he didn't show. On April 24th, just a few days after the investigation began, Song took his wife and 3 daughters to Boang-gon and checked into a motel. At approximately 10 AM on the 25th, Song told his wife that the police would now be looking for him, but cryptically stated, "Whatever anyone says, please believe me. I was only a witness." She asked him to elaborate, but he said he needed some time to clear his head first. She gave him 100,000 won in cash, around $70 US, as well as a debit card. Then he left. That was the last time anyone saw Song Ji-young. Coincidentally, or not, April 25th was also the day of his second scheduled police interview. When he failed to appear, a wanted order was issued. For 5 long years, nothing happened. Then, in July 2014, workers at a construction site just 3 kilometers from the moving company stumbled upon a disused septic tank. Inside, they found a skeleton. It was a male, and the body had clearly been there for some time. The bones were soon confirmed to be Kwang-eun. An autopsy revealed at least 10 stab wounds on his ribs, with his black jumper having been torn in several places by a sharp weapon. Foul play was now undeniable, but Song Ji-young was still missing. For years, police hoped that Song's condition would eventually lead them to him. He suffered from Behçet's disease, a rare and chronic inflammatory disorder that causes painful ulcers and requires continuous medication. It's not something that can be ignored for long. Investigators thought that he would eventually surface to get a prescription, but no medical records ever turned up. They even searched for anyone in the country receiving treatment for the condition, checking for possible aliases. Still, nothing. He hadn't contacted his family, and there were no signs of card usage or phone activity. It was as though he had fallen off the face of the earth. At this point, investigators were left with 3 theories. First, that he had assumed a new identity and is living under an alias, a theory that feels increasingly unlikely in an era of biometric data, AI, surveillance, and facial recognition. However, if anyone could become a ghost, it was Song. He'd spent 3 years working with a private crime prevention team and knew how the police searched for wanted suspects. Second, that he escaped overseas through an illegal route, possibly to China or the Philippines, a method frequently used by fugitives, though an expensive one that would have cost more than the 100,000 won he had on hand. The third, and perhaps most plausible theory, is that he's already deceased. Behçet's disease, without proper medication, can be fatal. If he didn't get access to treatment, it's entirely possible he passed from complications. But then there's the question of whether he acted alone. Song Ji-young was 5 foot 4 inches tall and physically slight. Kwang-eun, on the other hand, stood a bit taller at 5 foot 7, but more importantly, he was muscular and weighed around 80 kilograms. Could Song really have overpowered him alone? Desperate, and with a blade in hand, I think it's more than possible that he could have. But then there's that ominous line that he told his wife just before vanishing. "I was only a witness." That could have been a lie, sure, but is it possible that someone else was involved? Just like in the earlier case of Park Jong-yoon, could Song Ji-young have been forever silenced by his own associate? In 2020, 11 years after Kwang-eun's slaying, the police finally made the decision to add Song to the public wanted list, releasing his name and photo nationwide. The delay wasn't for lack of will, but strategy. They feared going public too soon might push him further underground, but after years passed with zero developments, they finally turned to the public for help. For more than a decade and a half now, Song Ji-young has been missing. The Jeonbok cold case unit is still waiting, hoping for one piece of information that might finally bring him to justice, though with each year that passes, the chances of that happening feel more and more remote. A huge thank you to my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters: George Lopez, Holly Lyons, Alana Pons, Asiamina, Alicia 1996 V, Azrael Warakai, Aðalsteinn Traustason, Colin Monsma, Connor Louthan, Emzetz, Farewelltattoosjaxfl, Gina Valera, Gracearchie, Hamish, John Stuart Muller, Mistyblue Longie, Peter Lulgjuraj, DNS Mum, Terry Ford, and Yokai. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Remember to hit that like button, and I'll see you all again very soon.